I'm here to talk about homeschooling, and I will incorporate Spanish in that. Why do you care about homeschooling? Well, because we're shut down, and school is going to be entirely online or mostly online starting in August and September. If you haven't heard, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But that's what it's going to be. So if the kids do go to school, they'll go once or twice a week, and they're going to be masked, they're going to be separated, it's mostly be online, and it's going to be hot mess express, and it's going to not work. So the best thing for you to do is get into homeschooling just like me. My oldest child is 16, and he's never been in school. I've been homeschooling over 10 years now, and I have a technique that could be used whether you're teaching entirely in English, whether you're teaching entirely in Spanish, or whether you're doing a little bit of both. It works. It's very simple and it's very cheap. It's so simple and cheap that you're going to think there must be more. I have to change it. I have to complicate it. But you don't. It's just simple and it works. And it works. Here's what it is. You're going to read to your child. What you read and how long you read depends on the child. Okay, and the subject. So for instance, for a little kid that's maybe 6 and doesn't have a long attention span, I might read a story from a story Bible. Okay, at the end, I'm going to say, what was that about? Tell me that story. What was in that chapter? What was in that scripture? What was in that article? Tell me what I just read. Okay, all that is the same thing. Basically, you want them to retell what you read, and they retell it. If they say something that's factually incorrect, you correct them. If they say the people lived in England, you can say no, they lived in Italy. Okay? So you correct things that are just wrong. But you don't do the narration for them. You don't baby them through it. You don't spoon feed them. You just read it and they narrate it. And whatever they say pretty much stands. If they do a terrible narration, then you say, oh, okay, seems like that was difficult. And you just move on. Okay? If they didn't do a good job, it could be that they weren't paying attention. And in that case, you're going to show them that you noticed that, and they're going to want to do better next time. They're going to want to please you. They're going to want to know what you're reading, because the things that you're reading to them are very interesting, and they're not going to want to make that a habit. Okay? If they didn't do a good job, it could be not that they weren't paying attention, but that the thing that you picked to read to them was way over their heads. So in that case, you need to pick something different, something easier. Maybe you read too long. Maybe they can only listen to one paragraph, and then they need to orally narrate, because if you read to them a whole chapter, they can't do it. Okay, so maybe you need to pick shorter chunks to give them. Okay, once they get past the story Bible stage, you're going to want to go to an easy to read Bible like this, an IRV Bible. Okay, it's easy. And then if, let's say you're learning Spanish, you can then start reading to them in a Spanish Bible. You can read stories that they already know in English, and then it's going to help them with their comprehension. Finally, the hardest part is the King James Version, and a lot of Spanish-speaking people like a version of the Bible that is very similar to the King James Version, in that it's poetic and it's a little archaic, and you could read that. You could read that as well. So you could be reading the Bible in Spanish, an easy version, or I forget the name of their RVR. I forget the name of their version that they really like. That's like the King James Version. But anyway, I have a Bible that's a bilingual Bible, parallel text Bible, so they can read a little bit of that. So you understand how you would teach Bible? You read a passage or a story. You say, tell me that. They tell you. And then you moving on to another subject. Okay, so science. This book has, every chapter is about a different scientist, a different biologist, and in history, and it explains the science that they did. So my daughter read this, and after she read every chapter, she told me what she read, and because she's older, she also could do written narrations. Okay, you don't want to rush this. Sometimes I think we kind of have big heads where we think our kids are really advanced and we want them to do things that they're not ready for. If your kids seem to be naughty, they seem to be rebellious, they seem to be stubborn when you ask them to do things, you really got to check yourself to see maybe you're asking them to do things that are too difficult for them. Okay? You don't want to rush the written narrations. You could wait till they're 10 and you could tell them to write one sentence. You could say, honey, I just want you to write 1 or 2 sentences and then mommy will write the rest for you. Okay? Once they get that going real well, then you can ease into having them write more. If they have terrible spelling and they don't know where to put uppercase letters and they don't know punctuation, then you can say, after you write it, please read it to me. And they read it to you. And then you can say, that's good, right? Then later on, you're going to go and you're going to erase their mistakes and you're going to fix it for them, right? Because I know my kids weren't very good spellers when they were little, my older 3, and I wanted to encourage them that they're doing good content and not make spelling the beginning and the end of writing, right? So I say, okay, good content, and then I fix their errors, right? Okay, so once a week is enough for a written narration to begin with, and once the kids get older and they learn how to write, and they learn how to type, and they learn how to spell better, then you can increase those written narrations. Oral narrations, you could do several of those a day. And I start when they're 6, and my kids are good, okay? My kids read on their own free time. They're reading Sherlock Holmes, they're reading Great Expectations in the free time, they're asking for history books. I get these on Amazon. They read those. Well, one of them, it does minimal reading in free time, but most of them do a lot of reading in free time. This is a science book that they really enjoyed. They read in their free time. I do not ask for any narrations on their things that they read in their free time, because that's their free time. Okay, school doesn't take all day. Okay, free time, you read. No assignments are required. If it's for homeschool, I'm going to ask for oral narration or written narration. Okay, this is a book you could ask for oral narrations. I do allow my students to do oral narrations in English almost all the time. Okay, so I say you can tell me in English or Spanish, and they usually pick English because my kids aren't fluent in Spanish, and I want to motivate them to pay attention, and I want them to be able to retell so they remember it better, so that they have that mental exercise to retell. And so I let them do it in English. And also, my motivation right now is not really to push them to speak, but more just to get the input. So I usually do let them, as I said, I let them retell in English. This is a book I started to read to my kids. I was so excited that they could understand it. And then I put it on my bed, I fell asleep on it. The baby had a diaper leak on it. I'm sorry, but it was a great idea, but I never finished. I never finished that book. So occasionally you find a book that you're not going to ask for oral narrations because it just wouldn't make sense. I have an example here. This book says cat, dog, fish, a motorcycle, a train. I'm not asking for oral narration because that's going to be silly. Why would I? You don't have to ask for oral narration on every single thing. If it's something they read in their free time, no. If it doesn't make sense to ask for oral narration, then no. This is a book of poetry I have in my lap. I'm looking for, okay, peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. When you're teaching poetry, you're going to just tell them the poem and be done. Don't do a worksheet. Don't do a big map of it and all this, big lesson afterwards. Don't ask them to have to do a project, just read them the poetry, for goodness sake. My teachers made such a big deal of poetry and made it so boring. I hated poetry for years. Okay? Just read them the poems. When they get a little older, and you read a poem with a lot of substance, where it makes sense to ask for more narration, you do so. And then, this is amazing. When your kids are old enough, you can ask them to write about a topic in the style of a certain poem, and they can actually do it. They can write their narrations in the style of a poem. You would think that this couldn't be true, but when they're older, they can get really creative. They can write creatively. They can write persuasively. But the foundation is just narrating. And that creative writing and that persuasive writing comes later. And it will just come naturally. You won't need to push it. Okay? Most of the time, you don't even have to require it, because they just decide that that's what they want to do in their free time, or they ask you. Oh, very good. Very simple. Very simple. Okay, so I hope you understand. I feel like it's so simple that, I'm beating a dead horse talking about it further, but I have taught people in real life. I've tried to teach people, and they didn't get it. Like, they would think, oh, I'll ask them, what's your favorite part? What? No, I don't want you to tell me one little tidbit. I want you to tell me it all. If you can tell me a big, long thing, and you can use the style that I used when I read it, that's the best. So I don't want to hear, my favorite part was that it had a mouse. No, I want you to retell the book. Right? I'm not asking you, did you like it? What's your favorite part? I'm asking you to retell it. It's so simple. It's so powerful. You can do it in English. You can do it in Spanish. You could use important books. I had my older kids read part of the Communist Manifesto. I read to them AOC's Green New Deal. Okay, I'm having them read the King James Version Bible. I'm picking out important stuff that relates to the communist and anarchist uprisings that we're having right now. And it's important for people to have their minds in the right place, right? So with homeschooling, for me, it's not just about the schools are closed. I was homeschooling already. For me, it's about the education. And I guess I have other reasons too, but mainly I feel like they're getting a really good education at home, and it's super cheap and it's super simple. If I can do it, you can do it, right? So I hope this was helpful to somebody. If you have any questions about homeschooling, don't hesitate to ask. If I can't answer briefly, I'll just put a link to somebody else's webpage or somebody else's video, so that you can get a more in-depth answer. Or I could make another video on what you're interested in. I don't know if any of my viewers are interested, but I hope so. I hope it was helpful, and you have a great day.